Hello, and welcome to the first session of Project for a Post-Monetary Economy with Stefan Heidenreich. This is going to be an 8-session seminar, and I will pass the mic off to him now.
Well, in this term, it's going to be four sessions.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're right.
Yeah. It was next term. We're going to see how if we continue or what we're going to do. But for now, it's 4, 2 in May, 2 in June. The topic for a post-monetary economy is a very simple idea, namely the idea that we can make an economy, we can create an economy, or it's technically possible to create an economy that runs without money. That means if we take a distribution and allocation as the main tasks of economy, these are tasks that can be solved through networks and through intelligent algorithms. Okay, I restricted myself clearly in the whole class to let's say the design of a positive utopia. That doesn't mean that I think there is no negative utopia possible. On the opposite, we're heading in a direction of the negative utopia, but the aim is to just to to conceive what we can hope for, just as a matter of how to put it, as a matter of not to act against or in relation to our current economy only from the position of resistance, but also in order to rather think where could things actually go. The non-monetary idea is a bit more how to say abstract and radical than what we are accustomed from, let's say, accelerationist ideas. But of course, the accelerationist ideas is somehow also a ground from which the whole thing is developed. Non-monetary doesn't mean that we get rid of cash. No, that's clear. But that means that we get rid of a general equivalent as such, and that has some more philosophical consequences. And I'm not really sure how much real economists can deal with that. Actually, I had a working group here in Germany at the University of Bonn, where some economists from Vienna were included. And now they invited me for a conference in Budapest, for like a real economy conference, so to say. And I myself am very curious of whether that can, whether an idea like that can land. Let's put it like that. Now, I don't think that idea precisely like that was formulated anywhere else, which makes for the assessment that either it's really something new, which is very unlikely, or it's that I'm the first one that comes up with something new. It's somehow unlikely, or that it doesn't make sense at all, which is the more likely thing. But still, one should risk to try to think about a system like that, even if it doesn't really work out like I think it could. And on the other hand, it's something very practical. So there's theoretical considerations that point to the same direction. But I tried to limit myself to think it in very practical terms. So in one way, it's something very abstract. In the other way, it's something very simple. It's both at the same time. Something about me. I'm coming originally from media studies, but I studied philosophy, and also for a certain period of time economy. I didn't finish studying economy, but just for the basics, I did, so to say, 2 years of it. My research on economy started in 2005 when I was writing the first book with my brother, and he's neither an economist, but it's rather coming from an activist Marxist framework. And to both of us at that time was clear, as to many bloggers especially, and so to say people that adhere to heterodox economic theories, it was very clear that the economic situation was heading towards a crisis. That then also happened 2 years later. And on occasion of that, we wrote the first book. Then we wrote a second book called Demands. It was also not translated in English. And in that second book, which appeared 1.5 years ago, the last chapter deals with exactly the same question of the non-monetary, of a possible non-monetary utopian economy. Then I decided that it would merit more research and a bit more work, and to basically that what I'm talking about now is the new book that is almost done. It's about to appear in June or July, and that deals entirely with that topic. In the course of writing that book, I had some discussions with my brother where, let's say, the old Marxist framework did not support the way that I was going, and then in the end he told me that I have to write this one alone. So it's basically, it's still a lot of ideas that I developed with my brother, especially the idea of, so to say, what to do with thinking objects, and with the idea that these objects actually could belong to themselves. We don't need property in order to conceive of these objects. But other topics, on other topics, the differences were too strong, like mainly on the topic of work, which I want to propose to replace entirely by something that is called relational activities. And on the topic of value, where I would also say, I mean, we agreed to some degree, but not fully, where I would say we have a multiplicity or multi-dimensional value system that is, so to say, instantiated on the occasion of every transaction. We're going to come to that later. It's the 9th chapter or so. I quickly go through the chapters, and then I let some room for you to introduce yourself and the core questions that you have. So the chapters, you may, if you like, just as you like, you may all go to the to my workspace that I set up for this seminar, which is the which you find on etherpad.net/P, like the letter P, /post-monetary. And there, I think it works better on the pad if we're asking questions, maybe not in the chat here, but we note it down in the pad so that I can react to it. Like, I don't have to react to it straight, but it's rather a question that is something like a little notebook that we can run at the side. So I would recommend for opportunity of actively participating in a discussion, we can use the chat, but we can also use the other pad. Actually, I can also post the link again in chat.
Oh, I posted it in the chat. Okay, great.
We posted it already in the chat. It's already there. Sorry, I didn't notice that. Okay, then I would propose. Okay, if all of you briefly tell who you are and what's your main interest or where you come from, as you like, so that I can somehow get an idea to whom I'm talking. That would be great. We start from Theodore. Can you manage to? You have more an overview. Can
Sure.
you manage the round?
Yeah. Do you want to go for, let's start with from left to right. I have Davor first. Do you want to introduce yourself, Davor?
Hello. My name is Davor. I'm a sociologist from Berlin, and I've been dealing with the history of humanity and civilization from the perspective of cultural evolution. And coming from a history of technology and media and also economy, I'm kind of interested to see Stefan Heidenreich's take on a post-monetary economy, I guess.
Super.
Okay, actually, with Davor, I met Davor 3 days ago. We met for a beer and we had an extended discussion. So I'm pretty well aware where he comes from, what his base, what his questions is, or where our point of discussion is, which is maybe not exactly the one that is the overall in the seminar, but we're going to touch on the on the cross sections of his theoretical approach, and the one that I'm working on. We're going to deal with that. Anyhow, yeah.
Super.
Okay,
Next
Jacob.
person. Yes. Yep.
Hi. My name's Jacob Van Geest. My background's in information sciences. I have a master's in library and information science from the University of British Columbia. And I am currently a student here at the New Center, doing a certificate program in social and political thought. And my interests in terms of research are kind of at their beginning stages, but I'm generally interested in the intersection of power and biopower in information and various networks and things like that. So that's me.
Okay, sounds cool. Great. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
And Joao, do you want to go next? Can you hear us, Joao?
Meredith?
Oh, Meredith, yeah, that's fine. You can go.
Okay, I'll go. My name is Meredith. I have a background in philosophy and media theory, although not in academia since 2004. I'm a computer scientist, and I run a company called Print All Over Me. We're constantly experimenting with different ways of remunerating our network, and alternate economies has been something that I've been thinking about a lot for the last 3 years. I know that you said that we're not going to discuss Bitcoin or currency alternatives, but I am really interested in sort of Ethereum and the way we can sort of create algorithmic ways of rewarding participants in a network, not necessarily associated with traditional buying and selling of goods.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, actually, of course, we're going to touch Bitcoin at some point, but just in order to make clear what is the difference between, how to say, the idea of a non-monetary system and the idea of a digital, how to say, implementation of money. I had some of the discussions with the Bitcoin people I had with Bitcoin supporters I had at the first Money Lab in Amsterdam that Gert Lovink did in 2013, and where he invited me and my brother to talk about the post-monetary ideas. I'm not sure whether that talk is online. As far as I know, all the YouTube talks that exist of me are horrible, so I hope it's not online. And the one with my brother anyhow is a continuous English stumbling and bumbling that I'm kind of okay. I wish it were not online, but there's a written version in the Money Lab reader, in the first Money Lab reader, that can also serve actually as an introductory material to that course. I completely forgot. I'm not really good in, so to say, distributing my own material. But whoever wants to read it, wants to look it up, it's the Money Lab reader by the Institute for Network Culture, edited by the Institute, but published by the Institute of Network Culture in Amsterdam. The first Money Lab reader, and there's a paper. Okay. Thanks for. I'm curious. I mean, whatever. And one other remark. I always enjoy if programmers or people that are active in programming join. My programming knowledge is so. I know a little bit C++. I know what is object-oriented programming, but I'm not an active programmer. So I'm always interested in that perspective.
Jason, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, my video is not working. My name is Jason Adams. I'm co-director of the New Center, and I'm very interested in this class. My background is mostly not in political economy, but my undergrad was political economy and social change at Evergreen in Washington State. And when I took the political economy classes at the undergrad level, at least before I got into critical theory, I was largely interested in gift economies, especially Genevieve Vaughn, who wrote a book called For Giving, a feminist critique of exchange, which appropriately enough is available for free as a gift online on a website that she actually pays to maintain it in order to give away her book. So I'm interested in that, and very interested in the idea of moving beyond Bitcoin and sort of just alternative currencies, because I did work with some of them in Gainesville, Florida, kind of similar to Ithaca hours, this concept of hours as an alternative currency. And in my experience, it was just really a failure. It did not work, and tried to act as though somebody mowing a lawn and somebody providing medical services would be paid the same amount somehow, and definitely did not work out that way. So I'm curious in about what the impact of taking away the currency form and kind of moving beyond the idea of an alternative currency, what impact that might have on attempts like that, on attempts that would be similar to an alternative currency, but are not exactly that.
Yeah. Could you post a link to the book that you mentioned online on the chat? That would be great.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, to a certain degree, this is also okay. I'm supposed to teach, no? I do what I as good as I can, but to me, that is all still ongoing research. So at the same time, this seminar is also a type of, let's say, research seminar at the same time. And what I forgot is to just briefly mention my academic background, if you want. I did not only study economy, but I also worked then for quite some years with Friedrich Kittler at Humboldt University, basically claiming to do my PhD, which I never did. But in the end, I studied with him for basically since he came to Berlin from '92 to 2000 or so. And I also had a job with this institute. So it's everything is a bit coming from Kittlerian German media theory, of which, just to elaborate a little bit on the background, of which in let's say in the rest of the world, mostly and sadly only the media historians are known. And there was also a wing of, let's say, practitioners or people that went into, let's say, not really design, but practical issues. But these never, and I count myself amongst them, these never really made it into the German academia. I mean, I somehow made it into the German academia, but on another field. And now I teach my whole job as a visiting professor for art theory, which is a completely different field. And I'm also writing a lot in the arts, visiting professor for art theory at the University of Cologne. So that's my day job, if you want. And the economy is just something that I study for myself, and rather without serious hope to be recognized in the academic field. That's something that might change with the conference in Budapest, but I really cannot assess the whole economic field of economy from that perspective. Okay, what we're going to do is
we have one more student, Kasra, who hasn't.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Sorry.
Okay. Hello and guten Abend. I just understood about this class about 2 hours ago, and it's like I just joined the news center 2 weeks ago, and right now I'm just clearing my mind, but I will try to talk about my ideas sooner or later, because now I just want to understand about this class. So sorry. Yep.
Yeah, no problem. I didn't want to put pressure on you to come up with ideas or whatever.
I got the link for the last class about 30 minutes ago, and I couldn't watch it the whole video. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah. No, but as soon as you come up with more precise questions or with more ideas in which direction the whole thing should go, then don't hesitate and come forward and tell them.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for joining. But now, we missed Joao still, but he's
yeah.
Okay, in terms of intro.
Joao stepped away for a little bit. He says he's an artist and writer based in New York City.
Okay, cool.
Joao, if you're back and you want to introduce yourself, feel free to step in.
I think he's still okay.
Okay.
No. So okay, let's go into the material. Unfortunately, when Mo invited me to do the course, I promised him that that there would be an English version of the book out. The book is called Money, but Strike Through Money for a Non-Monetary Economy. Actually, we decided to put not post-monetary but non-monetary because it's not planned like a. The idea is not that we have a historical succession, like we have first a monetary economy and then we have a a post-monetary, something like after the monetary. But it's rather the step is more a logical step. There's something that you can do with money and something that you do, and another idea that you do without money, and they may even run in parallel. The suspicion somehow is even that we're already within the transition to the non-monetary economy, and that it may be even something that we don't really notice, or that we notice only when knowing what's happened. We're going to come to that kind of symptoms where you could actually tell from that part of our, let's say, part of our economy is not really monetary any longer. I can just point to one very simple daily experience, so to say. If you're looking at prices for flights, we all know that these prices continuously change. Maybe some of you have already also noticed that they also change according to who visits them, who visits the sites, from which computer, and depending on whether you allow for cookies or not, or whether you erase the cookies. So means they are also personalized prices. And that fluctuation of prices is already let's say a hint towards the system where the price is not adding information to the economic system, but it's rather like that the information that you have from data, from user data, profile data and whatnot, is creating a price opportunity. Like say the price is a completely dependent variable and information comes from somewhere else, meaning that there is already more information that available than what the prices can process. And that touches upon a core function like in economy, because the, so to say, the economic school that adheres to normal markets and normal money is saying that prices have so to say an information function. This information function already doesn't exist any longer. Not in all the fields, not still in some fields prices hold an information because they aggregate a lot of actions, a lot of trading, but in other fields they clearly do no longer do that. And for that matter, that is, I would read it from the perspective of a non-monetary economy. I would read it as already a sign of, how to say, non-monetary mechanisms taking over within the old pricing system. And the flight pricing is not the only thing. There's also ideas, for example, of personalized prices that after having scanned the users for long enough, that you make strictly personalized offers that are only limited for the very moment, and that are based on, so to say, assessment of what that user would be willing to pay. So also that all that kind of the relation between information and prices is not what it used to be. It's not what the classical economy thinks it should be. Okay, let's get into the material. What I plan to do, and we have to figure out whether that actually works, because it's also my first Google Hangout seminar, and it's also, it's not completely the first time that I teach in English, but yeah, I didn't do that. I haven't done it that very often. So whenever you feel like something could be improved, just let me know. I'm open to all suggestions. Good. I basically go through the book and I try to, so to say, I don't translate on the fly what is written in the German version, but I kind of give a summary of what's written there. So there might be also pauses because I'm at the same time reading the general version. I'm also looking up. You see me looking up at that screen because there is where the text is. So please feel free to interrupt me at any time. I'm going to proceed for now. Questions are really welcome because they also help me to see where the book has some flaws, where I have to add something, where maybe jump or so. Okay, good. The introduction starts basically with what I said as an introduction, that the task of the economy, or what economy does, is distributing and allocating goods. And kind of that, so to say, functional idea of economy is clear from that functional idea that money is only one of very many means or media that serves to, to govern economic processes. One of the points that helped me develop the idea, one of the books that helped me develop the idea is, of course, the David Graeber's 5,000 Years of Debt, where he tells the history of money that not a history of money, but a history of credit, and where he claims that money only came at a rather late stage, and that what came first, in order to the first technical medium that, so to say, transcended the sphere of local experience, was writing and notation systems. And as far as you look back into the archaeological remnants of old cultures like Babylon, Egypt, and so on, there was very many economic transactions being recorded. And not only that, but one could even make the stronger thesis that the system of recording itself, writing itself, does derive from economic records. And, so to say, writing started first there and was then, so to say, applied to spoken language. For media theory, that would be a very interesting point, but for here, for the economic line of thought, the most interesting point here is that you have that notation systems come before money, and that money basically came into being as transportable notation items, like as a derivative of these notation systems. And that derivative made sense in the context of early armies, of early military, especially of military expansion, because you could install, the states were able to install the circuit by taxing the population and handing out the army to the money to the army that then would pay the population, so that you have a circle. Peasants, farmers pay tax goes to the soldier buys stuff from the peasant, and so on. It's basically was a decentralized circulation system that was growing through money. But the main point is that all economy was also being done by notation systems. In that, so to say, bracket, to make a bracket, a short deviation, the religious systems that we still witness, that we still have today, I would read as reminders of these, or narrative reminders of these, in the meantime, broken down notation systems. There was one, and Michael Hudson very often points to that. There was in the early religious or temple economies, there was every 5 years or every 3 years you had a general debt relief, because else the powers of accumulation would grow too big, as they do today, by the way. And that debt relief is still lingering around in our religions, and the most famous example is, of course, the how do you call the Christian prayer, Vater unser, in German? Well, the main prayer of the Christians: please forgive our debts as we forgive our debtors. No? That refers actually back to that general debt relief, and it refers through leaving back to the debt relief. It refers back to the times when religions were actually started as, I would say, narrative framings of early banking. That's just a side thought. It's not important for us, but so to say, some historical historical link. Now, I have I don't have the impression. If you look at the relation, what it depends of, what depends the relation between notation systems and transactions from. I think my image is my image still there? It stopped kind of. I'm still there. If you look at the constraints that, so to say, limit the application of notation systems for economy, it's clear you have a certain relations of the capacity of the notation system on the one side and of the amount of transactions on the other side. How to say, if you look at all temples and all the lists as a part of an early computing, then it's clear that they have limited computer power. They have limited storage power, and they can only cover an economy to a certain. Somebody's talking. They can only cover an economy to a certain reach, to a certain quantitative limit. With money, of course, the number of transactions can almost go as high as they want, because money doesn't only allow to circulate the transactions or the exchange of economic goods, but it also does one very important thing, which is it flattens out the calculations. Like if you have a complete exchange, like two transactions, one is giving a good or an object and the other one pays with money, there's no rest, nothing remains. There's no need to keep a record of that transaction. And in doing so, money is not only a transportable medium of economy, a transportable writing system, but it's also a form of data compression, because it saves so much data. And the historical line of thought is then that as soon as our notation systems and our computing capacity allows again for annotating and computing all the transactions, we are technically at the point to think about going back to an economy that is based on memory systems, on transaction systems, on memory systems and computing instead of money. We can think about, theoretically, that's the point from which we can think about that we may not need money. The One Economist paper that came closest to that, as far as I can tell, is a paper that you find in the reading list by a guy that still works for the Federal Reserve Bank in Minnesota. I think he was heading. He made his career later in the American central banks. He was even part of the Fed committee. But before his career in 1996, he wrote a paper which is called "Money is Memory." His name is Narayana Kocherlakota. He even had a piece on Bloomberg, or I think it was on Bloomberg just 2 or 3 days ago. So he's somebody who is, so to say, also even in the political amongst the political commentators on economic issues, somebody who has a voice, who's quite well known. But I haven't read anything else of his papers that comes close to that early 1996 paper. In that paper, he basically tries to show that under certain economic conditions, memory systems can completely replace the circulation of money. But of course, the one step that he doesn't do is that he doesn't acknowledge that there would be a possibility of getting rid of the general equivalent. So he would just replace the annotation system. Basically, it's like a credit system. But it's not. He doesn't think about that we may not need the core underlying notation, the core underlying value. Hi. No.
Could you type that name in the sidebar for us?
Could I? Sorry.
Could you type the name in the sidebar for us?
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Let's stop. Sorry. But as the paper is called "Money is Memory."
Thank you.
So now I'm instead of going strictly along the text, I was of course telling you all kind of stuff that is already okay. Then I keep going with the text. But first, just any questions to what I just told, or should I just go on?
I just put a link to a paper there.
Okay. Well, now let me just skim through over the next part. I still have to kind of adjust the pace of which I'm going through all the stuff. So we're still also technically in a adjustment phase, let's say. But I see okay, time starts to fly. So I'm going to maybe speed a little bit up. Let's see. There is the one thing that, of course, also that paper and the whole idea of artificial intelligence interfering with the economy has, and that's what you read everywhere, has or threatens our jobs, which is a kind of ridiculous diagnosis if it weren't seen from the old economy, because if computers do work that we're forced to do, normally you would think on the aggregate, it should make life easier. But that's basically what counts for all machinery. So the whole idea that we should keep doing work that can be done by computers doesn't make sense. It's like I had the discussions also with Ralph for quite a while, because it's a standard with, if you talk to unions, it's like they are taking away the work, which to me it shows how upside down the whole ideology of work is. Actually, we should be happy that somebody is taking off that bullshit work. And of course, it cannot be a perspective to, let's say, get rid of washing machines and wash the stuff and go back to washing the stuff in the river, all the clothes in the river or something like that. So, from that perspective, that of taking away our work, there's something deeply wrong with it. And what is wrong is actually its attachment to the current false rhetoric of the economic system. What I think are two things that we have to keep in mind. The one idea is, of course, that we should not fight to not let the robots do the work, but rather to distribute the work that the robots do equally. That's much more the point. And the second point is that, of course, through through all phases of technology improvement and of new technologies, it always ended up with doing the humans doing the work at the edge of the machinery. And it's always been like that. It's going to be like that again. So the dystopian, the dystopian side of the non-monetary economy and of an economy with artificial intelligence running part of the economy doesn't lie there. It doesn't lie in the fact that the economy that the computers are going to take away our work. It lies rather in the fact that we're approaching a political system of, let's say, algorithmic dictatorship, if you want. That basically the technological frame becomes so dominant that if it now enters the decision sphere, we all of a sudden manipulated with our decisions in a direction that that is not in our control. That means for one of the core systems, one of the core procedures in the system, which is the matching. We're going to come to that. The matching process that basically decides, does not decide, but could decide on the allocation and the distribution. One has to try to implement a function that is not a decisive function, but it's rather an information brokering function. So then there is the other part that I make clear, that it's not about like substituting money by other digital types of money like Bitcoin, because that is not tackling the idea, or is not questioning the idea of the general equivalent. Now one could of course ask, okay, it's one thing to talk about a non-monetary economy, but why can't we do it with, so to say, keeping the general equivalent in the background? There's two main reasons for that. Why one has to posit the questions more general. And I have to just note something down to not forget that. Okay. So, well, let me just note down. The main obstacle of money, or the main mistake that is inherent in money, is that it serves different functions. Whenever you start reading the definition of money in some books, it always says like it's about payment, it's about storing something, and it's about accumulation. And so to say, the functional overlap of payment systems and the possibility of accumulation is what makes money such a, so to say, I could say dangerous, but dangerous is not the right word, such a destructive entity. And that was even clear in the early notation systems, that the powers to be figured out that without the debt relief, they would be overwhelmed by monetary power. I think they didn't do the debt relief just to help poor people. That's not the point. They had to do the debt relief in order to fight the accumulation that takes place somewhere, but not in there, so to say, also somewhere outside their power. So these other powers of accumulation had to be kept small. Of course, what we know is that this is no longer the case. And especially in our economy, it's not at all the case. We can, by now, more or less regard the whole economic activity as something that is driven by that is a tributary system. Basically, whichever transaction we do, we pay some tribute. It's, if you want to put it in economic terms, it's a trickle-up system. It was actually one of the most funny and ridiculous ideas of the last 20, 30 years was a neoliberal claim that there would be, that something would trickle down. And of course, what it leads to was first a debt-driven accumulation of wealth in the hands of the few. And what is happening now is that we have debt, that we replace, so to say, the debt driver in that accumulation scheme by a continuous quantitative easing that, so to say, hands out the money directly to the finance industry. We could almost say that in terms of, if you look at it from the monetary phase, that there's already a decoupling from the real economy, like from real production, in the sense that you have a financial subsystem that is only about accumulation and is, so to say, kept up by the constant flow of newly created central banks money and of newly created credit that is depending, to a certain degree, depending on that central bank's money, whilst the real economy of production is stagnating since a while. Also points to the fact that there's no drive for investment, for real investment, like investment in production. Okay, but that would be the description of the real economy, which I don't want to get too much into. The main point here is that the idea of a non-monetary economy, of course, the medium that allows for such levels of accumulation, and that's one of its main points. That's, so to say, if you want, that's the revolutionary core in the whole idea. Without these means without the medium that allows for the accumulation, no accumulation of that type can result from economic transactions. That doesn't mean that everybody's equal. It also doesn't mean that all the problems are solved. By no means. I think we're trading. It's a trade-off in a way. A data-rich system that has its potential dangers in control, in a total control society. That's the danger of where my utopian system is bordering. Whilst on the other side we have system that also tends to come down to develop into a control system, but that allows at the same time for the almost unlimited accumulation of goods in the hands of the few. Okay, but that's one of the main ideas why I say we cannot simply replace money because that doesn't change anything in terms of accumulation. That's also my critique of Bitcoin. It's built on a very nice peer-to-peer idea, like a decentralized monetary function. That's nice, and actually that decentralized part, as much as it's encrypted in the blockchain mechanism, could also be of use for developing a non-monetary, but its use as a substitute money is what makes it just, so to say, being part of the system. Now I read some commentary here, or what? Let me figure out. Okay. Right. That's a debt relief. Okay, I didn't follow all the. Yeah, the debt relief exactly was the Jubilee year in Judaism. The potlatch, I'm not so sure whether potlatch is really debt relief. One has to look in the details there, and I don't know all of it. I think as much as Maus describes it, not near. Yeah, the history of debt relief. There were debt reliefs in the medieval times, but I'm not 100% sure. I couldn't tell now when. Christianity in replacing debt by sins basically turned the idea of an economic measurement from an economic measurement to imposing a method of control, I would say. But okay, but these are side points that are interesting, but as I say, the core. And I also think that debt relief is just a sign of a system that wouldn't say is unequal or is not well equalized, but it's a sign of a system that creates that creates inequalities by itself, and the inequalities have to be relieved by outside measures. Okay. Then we can go on. I mean, if we can look it up there, it's good to make all these notes in a pad, then we can look it up later. I don't have reference for that now for the debt relief. Good. Then I'm writing in the forward that actually the closest system to a non-monetary distribution accumulation is how to say the reputation systems as we find them, or the skill distribution systems as we find them in computer games. In being multi-dimensional systems of self-assessment that basically put you up to an organizational task. I mean, let's say on the visual front, these computer games look all like you run around, kill enemies, and do your quests. But on a higher level, we rather have almost organizational schools and organizational skills, because most of what happens there requires a lot of organizational skills in maintaining your own multidimensional values, health, and whatnot, and your skills, and accordingly act within a group. I would almost say very many of these computer games are already training camps for non-monetary systems of acting together. So that's also the reason why I would say, if at all, a non-monetary economic system would rather hope that it's built in that kind of gamers environment. Then I do give a little bit of the media theoretical basis in the whole argument, but just like briefly, there's okay, well, we're going to come back to that in the media and technology chapter, but let's just mention briefly. According along the lines of Kittler, there's something like a media a priori, technical a priori in media. That means that contrary to what is usually being told in the science sector and technology studies, we cannot really take media as something that is invented by society, but rather the opposite way, like that society is invented by the medium of self-description. Like society, an idea of society is as a self-description of very many people is deriving from its media technology. In the last consequences, that would of course mean that media come from nowhere, or it's just like almost media is a type of second nature, and of course it's not like that. But it's rather the idea that one could have behind is that there is a discursive jump or a discursive transition. Like you have a scientific discourse that creates a certain type of machinery, and its application is something different. It's something that cannot be planned, but it's that, so to say, transition between two separate fields that create the impression that media just come from nowhere. And from that, coming from that, you have two, I would almost say, laws that you could formulate. The one is going back to Marshall McLuhan, who's saying that whenever you have a new medium, it first maps or it first takes over the content of the old medium. Like take the example of cinema and theater. That's the easiest example. Early cinema used to look like theater being filmed. Most of it. There was a very early, so to say, technical experimental phase, but then very soon, when the genre established itself, it was more or less like theater being recorded on film. Whilst then we have a second phase that is more prone to an eigendynamic dynamics of its own, cultural, aesthetical, or not, dynamics of its own. And that is actually then exploring the affordances or exploring the possibilities that you find in a new medium. It's a very simple two-step relation that you can discover in very many media relations. And where you also find it is very obvious is the relation of Bitcoin, of let's say digital media and money, where you would say the first one is like mapping money on digital media. That's Bitcoin. You just rebuild it. You build the same thing. And the second phase would then only be to say, but wait, we have to think it more abstract. We have to actually look at what economy does and take it from that abstract viewpoint to try to figure out if we can implement the basic relations of money of economy without using the old medium. That would be phase 2. And the other result of that is, of course, that, and that was one of the discussions that you had within media theory very often, that people were arguing that a media theory with a technical a priori would be necessarily determinating, like saying whenever a new medium comes up, it determines the relation that happened behind it. Because the medium comes first, and then comes whatever society or personal relations or whatnot. And against that argument, there's one argument that also Kittler brought forth, is that the crucial point, the crucial factor in developing its own dynamics for a medium is not in what it was conceived for. Like, it's not lie in what it was conceived for. It does not lie in the planning. Does not lie in the so to say developing a medium for a certain purpose. That's not the point. But in acting against that purpose. So the real creative or progressive or forces that unleash what is there in potentiality in a medium are the hackers, are the people that try to cheat, are the people that try to use it against its purpose. These are the real productive forces within a medium. And from that derives the idea, of course, that we have to build, or so to say, the non-monetary, whatever non-monetary process we're imagining, it has to give space to the cheaters. It has to give space to the people that try to misuse it, because these are the most productive resource. That's a very important, theoretical point to be made. Okay. Any questions?
Yes, can I say something?
Yeah, okay, go ahead. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, just to rephrase it, you could also say that a new medium opens the possibility for phase transition of the whole society, and it opens up a new search space. So what you were saying, what the hacking is, what what the misuse basically of the media is basically the new potential of a new of a new phase space that is opening up. So I'm just trying to rephrase them. So there's a term of search space. Every system has a certain search space, and if you have a new medium, you allow for new types of relationships that weren't there before, and then you have a new search space where, so to say, the agents are by themselves flooding into the slots that are opening. So to say.
I was always wondering. I mean, we had that like 2 days ago when we were talking. There was that one point that you brought up in the generational transition. And okay, there's another. Okay, there's 2 more things coming in with the generational and media theory. First, in the classical transition times of media, you always had like very, let's say, rough transitions, like from theater to cinema or something like that. The general experience points to the fact that it takes 1 generation in order to adapt to or to unleash, to find the new rules, to find to invent new practices. That mechanism may, so to say, work as long as you have these kind of hard transitions, and the hard transitions, seen from a technical viewpoint, they derive from the fact that you had discretely distinctive mechanisms of coding and of storing, like you go from analog media to digital media to, and these create, so to say, very well-defined breaks, very well-defined, how to say, rough transitions. And then you have the generational mode of you can observe the generational mode of adaptation. Ever since the time of the media ended, we don't have these clear-cut transitions any longer, and that's because so to say, the driving force is not so much now a certain technology, but it's rather the development of platforms, of different types of platforms and social networks, and that, so to say, the time of media basically ended as soon as every type of information was being coded digitally and transmitted digitally, and you didn't have, so to say, more big inventions coming up from that side. So now we find ourselves in a phase where we have a continuous flow of new technological setups that trigger generation-specific behavior, but the relation of the technology to the generational use is not that clear any longer. So I'm not so sure whether that is, how to say, whether that is still a model that serves to explain too much. I'm actually, I'm also not sure whether the focus of Kittler that goes on technology by alone is describing what happens in the reality. I'm kind of doubtful whether that system one would have to adapt that system of thought. But this is another media specific discussion that.
Yeah, but the picture I have in mind is, I mean, if you imagine the smartphone is basically just a combination of a computer screen and a cell phone, but nobody knew. I mean, this was thinkable. Let's say the iPad was invented by Star Trek in the 90s or something like this. So it was imaginable that there would be something like a cell phone with a screen or something like this. But what was not imaginable at this stage of historical or civilizational runtime was that there will be an ad market. So the ad market emerges in the new search space that develops out of the combination of these 2 media.
Yeah, there's one thing where I'm a bit reluctant. Also, I would agree on that very specific thing, but there's one very strange experience that I had with media theory. Whenever systems of thought become too, let's say, rigid or formalistic, they tend to project the present in a very, how to say, in a very straightforward way. and my experience was what, for example, happened with media theory. They went totally bonkers about simulation and virtual spaces and whatnot. What they overlooked, completely overlooked, was the rise of the internet. And now, that's of course something, it's a very funny experience that you were sitting, that was the time basically when I was sitting in Kittler's seminar. And it was clear then, it went through all the phases from the phases that Zizek went from denial. Zizek takes from the what's her name, that theoretician of grief or whatnot. No? From denial to acknowledgement to hate to whatnot. No, you have these 10 phases that you go through in your reaction when something happens that you don't like a person dies or so. And the same thing kind of happened when it became clear that actually the media history that they had in mind didn't go on in the way that they imagined, because I think the system was too rigid. And so I have, for that matter, I strictly would limit the explanatory quality of too rigid, be it sociological or media theoretical systems. Because the real life, how would you call it? The real life entanglement of things is way more complex than the weather, and the weather we can also only forecast for a week. So basically, in forecasting, in theoretical forecasting, I would not subscribe. And then, of course, one can retroactively assume everything went according to the rules by sorting things that they go according to your rules. But I still think it's a theoretical overreach that lies in that kind of forecasting business. But that's another discussion, because it's basically a discussion how far is the forecasting quality of theoretical terms in that field, and I would say very, very limited. But that's a completely different discussion. And that's also but it's also one of the points why I say I'd rather instead of building a big system, I'd rather go and have a look with the theoretical apparatus that I have, and have a look into that kind of small utopian idea of the non-monetary.
I just want to paraphrase this idea of the two phases of media, right? The first one where the old one is getting mapped, and then the second one where from this mapping new rules are developing from. And this is not forecasting in that sense, but it seems to be a general mechanism in general, what to say, which allows for some sort of midterm forecast or something like this.
It's a general mechanism that is valid as long as you have clear transitions on the one side. But for example, I wouldn't exactly know how to apply that mechanism to the transition from Facebook to Instagram or to Snapchat. You could, of course, there's some ways out. You could say, okay, that's not a transition, or that's rather a mapping that works somewhere else. I would say these things, let's call it the McLuhan's law, applies very nicely to a field where you have discrete jumps from one media to another. But as soon as you don't have it any longer, you don't have the time to build that generational gap, and all of a sudden the descriptive quality of the whole law is gone. That's the problem that I would have with it. But that's a very, I mean, that's another it would be quite an interesting discussion between sociology, media theory, and all that. But I think I would keep it at the side for now, because it doesn't lead really to the core of where I want to go. So how is it with in the American system with 2.5 hour seminar? Is there a break in between, or how do you do it usually?
We can take a short break if people like. If people want to take like a 5-minute drink break or cigarette break, that's fine.
I would also, a 5-minute cigarette break would actually sounds like, then we restart at 22:30 sharp. Like that would be in 8 minutes. and then we have another hour.
That sounds great.
Yeah?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. See you then. Oh.
Hi, Kevin. We've just taken a short halftime break.
So everybody back. Oh no, there's lots of.
Oh yes, I put some questions that I was thinking about after the first part of the section in the sidebar.
Let me. Wow. Okay. Virtual sounds like that. Okay, let me briefly skim through the questions, because that's. But then I figured out, okay, the pace. I have to a little bit to adjust the pace of the whole thing. We're still stuck in the introduction, and I wanted to get to chapter 2 or so. The chapters are short. The whole book is just 80 pages, so we're not yet lost. But okay.
We'll get to the questions later then, if that works better for you.
No. As the questions come, before we start with the second round, let's get to questions. In regards to automation, no, it's good. Okay. In regards to automation replacing jobs, and isn't that a good thing? Who wants to work? How do our desires form the standards or model of necessity in different economic environmental situations? I would say, who wants to work? The whole idea that I propose is there to replace work by relational activities. Relational activities means like whatever activity you have, whatever you do that is in some ways regarded as valuable or used by somebody else, which is also a very simple idea that can be contested on various levels, but it basically says one person can only, can only claim that as many activities by others as she or he is able or willing to contribute. This of course has clear limits. No, there's people that cannot contribute and still have a right to eat and to live, and there's people that do not want to contribute and still they have a right to eat and to live. And there's also people that contribute something that you don't know whether it's a contribution, because the value of it would only show itself far in the future. Like most of academics counts for most of academics, and you couldn't even assess whether that would be ones of value or not. We're going to come back to that, but the general, so to say, personalized equivalent would be on average. That has to count, but with a big but that works given by the machines is of course distributed equally at best. Should be. Okay, then societies did not arguably air conditioning, but its invention and the presence form a new situation in which I desire a new standard of living, under which I also continuing to produce other goods, new standards in media environments. Also, one other questions.
Yeah, that first, the
No.
air conditioning.
No. I would also that I clearly support that. I don't think that most of inventions come from society's needs. There is no such thing as society's needs. I wouldn't even say, but not in the Thatcherian line. I would even say there is no society, because the society is a collective imaginary that pops up according to lines of communication. So we don't, or the methods of communication. We have a communicative self-imagery that is basically depending on the media of self-description. There is no such thing as an independent society, not independent of media. So there can also be not society's wishes or society's desires. I mean, what I'm saying, that the society, to perceive the society as a driving force is a misjudgment. Of course, there are collective desires, but still also the collective is governed, is created by media. One other question, these can be ignored or addressed later too. What are the possible abuses of an asymmetric type gift or economy? Does the equivalent become manifest in different areas of the social formation or not? Of course, the equivalent has to somehow manifest itself. It's more the question, what kind of, on which level of draconian measures you have to act in order to impose that. I think it doesn't, there's, as I said also, we had that topic also in the discussion about of the reading 2 nights ago, that of course this is not a system that is getting rid of all forms of social injustice. It's not a one trick saves all problems, universal problem solver. It's just proposing something that may, but most likely will work better than the better. It just means it's never perfect. This is a system that is meant to be, how to say, continuously squeezed and trigged and played, and so it's not about a perfect solution that I would say doesn't exist. I give them an item to another economic agent, but I expect to return in another non-economic cultural way. Yeah, sure. That's why you want to have a scalable system that does not only connect you, that doesn't only connect you personally to the person that you give something to. If that person has to distribute potatoes, maybe you don't want them, but somebody else might. Right, I think these, but we're coming to all these points if we keep going. I would suggest.
Okay. Yeah.
We try to get somewhere, because let me quickly tell what could be a program. I'm going to note it down. The distribution chapter, I think that yeah, okay, just let me just finish with I should have done it before the break, sorry. Just finish, but it's an argument that is also a good transition to the next phase. The one thing that is also kind of important is the late paper, Economic Perspective for Our Grandchildren by Steve Maynard Keynes, where it's 43 or something. It's in the syllabus. It's also online, where he basically says, like, within 2 generations, the economic problem should be solved. And with the economic problem, if I understand him right, he refers to the general idea, to the general, how to say, the general mechanism of distribution, and the general mechanism of this, of, so to say, socially just distribution. I don't know exactly how he planned to do that within the monetary economy, but I definitely would say that yes, it should have been solved, but it isn't, and we still have to think about how to solve it. But the most interesting for me is that perspective that how to say the current mingling of economy of power position is basic and power games is basically how to say a theoretical horrendously theoretical imperfect world. And I would not be surprised, like now thinking ahead, that if things go well, no, they can also go bad, but if things go well, we're going to look back at this century or this time with almost the same type of despise that we look back at the times of slavery now. If things go well. But okay. One has to, I don't know, the ideas, of course, to a certain degree, one has to first imagine possible future in order to just, how to say, at least debate what one could fight for. And on that level, just to mention it briefly, on that level is also where I'm not so, let's say, not so happy with the scope of the accelerationist perspectives, like be it either in the manifesto or be it in the platform capitalism book of Sunijek. The, how to say, the utopian ideas are either limited to social democratic, more or less social democratic old Keynesian ideas of the of 40 years ago, or how to say, don't really transcend the current system. There is something, you need something, let's say, more deep, so to say. I'm not saying that this is what I'm proposing is that is the only solution, but at least I try to propose something that could go in that direction, that could how to say, live up to that I request. Okay, that is more or less the introduction. Let's go to the first chapter. Okay, I quickly run. No, I actually did that already. We did go through all the chapters, and it doesn't make sense to do it again. Let's just dig into the first chapter and try to get through it, so we could. Let's say we should arrive at the. I write some dates in by next week. We should arrive at the matching chapter minimum. That's, so to say, the core functional process. And if you make it through value and work, that would be not bad. But then, because then the later chapters are shorter, these are the crucial parts. So if we get next time to the matching, that's already good. And then more or less we're on track to make it through the whole book. It's, as I said, it's a short book. It has 80 pages. It's more a manifesto type of thing, and I still have to edit a lot. Okay, let's go ahead. Distribution itself is a network problem, because it is about like putting lots of entities in relations. Of course, in these, if you micro apply media theory, the core term is the relation, not the entity. Or in other words, the relation defines the entities. That's not so. It's not completely uncommon, but just is to sketch out how to say, a link from media theory to a network-based application, where you would actually say there are no such like philosophical questions as what is something. What that always would refer to what is the entity at the end. No? we should be able to say that, but it replaces this entity by a how to say matrix or vortex. No, not vortex. But no, I lost them. By a matrix of relations, let's say. No, but the relations, the structure of relations, is the defining. Is the defining type, is the defining element, and not the endpoints. Kanten und Knoten und Kanten, edges, and how is the network theoretical terms? Knoten und Kanten is in German, it's edges and nodes, maybe, no? So the edges is what defines the nodes. From that perspective, I'm not saying that as an so to say absolute philosophical idea, but more as so to say as an applied assumption of the whole idea. There are some like organizational issues within the ideas of distribution. Like we already have now different systems of distribution. There's not only market systems, but we also have something like companies that establish their own systems of distributions that to some degree they are monetary based, to other degrees they are not. But one could always like say that the single company establishes an institution that is so to say shielded against the purely market-based monetary handling of distribution and allocation. And the one theory that is very interesting, and when it comes to that, is of course the Ronald Coase and its theorem on the transaction costs, where he basically tries to explain how the size of the company, the reasonable size of the company, depends on it saving transaction costs that you otherwise would have in the markets. From that theory, you can derive that as soon as transaction costs fall on a broad level, you would tend to either dissolve the big companies or turn themselves into, how to say, markets of market type sub-entities or isolated market entities. But it's there's that general relation about how to say how is distribution organized. One of the main differences that has to be clear is that in algorithmically managed systems, the algorithmically managed systems cannot be compared to the old planned economy systems of planned economy, simply because of the, how to say, short reaction time. Means whilst in old planning societies you had like kind of 5 years intervals for making a new plan or establishing a new plan that would then was meant to be executed for these 5 years, but you rather have to deal with microseconds. Basically, you have systems that seamlessly, or procedures that seamlessly can integrate in communication. So whatever you say about whatever one can say about the limits of planned economy, it doesn't necessarily apply to algorithmically planned economy, simply for the pace, for the time frame in which it operates. Okay, then comes the within the distribution. If there's an algorithm that handles a distribution, it's clear that the algorithm is not the type of auctionator like in the Walrasian idea of how to mathematized economy, where basically you have the market input, you have the possible price input, and there is an algorithm that decides which price is the optimum price which things are to sell, but we rather have to conceive of these algorithms as type of moderating algorithms. That means they enter in a dialogue, or they facilitate a dialogue. They don't do the main objective is not to decide things, but rather to manage a dialogue. And that also, there is some what we should take into account, that money, that one shouldn't frame money as something bad only, but rather so to say, to operate with a difference between, or to make operational differences of what of actually what the good qualities in money and the bad qualities, let's say. If we say, as I said, the bad effect of money is the accumulation that derives from throwing together the, medium of exchange and the medium of accumulation. One of the definitely good effects is that it overcomes overcomes limits of personal connection. That's the one criticism that one could make to very many of the commons projects, that they say, okay, we should have sharing economies, and actually we should build communities that share, where people share lots of goods. These communities all depend to a certain degree on personal communication or personal interaction. And one of the big and huge advantages of money was, of course, that it would overcome all those limits in personal connections. Like, I can go to whatever shop without knowing anybody there and buy whatever I want. I do not need to have a personal connection to that. And that kind of scope of integrative energy is something very important to maintain also in a data-based system. That's one of the reasons why I'm rather skeptical about commons-based solutions. Of course, one is again not that you buy that, or you can only reclaim that freedom that comes with money by allowing for a society of economic control, I wouldn't say, but economic profiling to a certain degree, which then of course brings up the well-known data problem. How do you handle data? And the obvious solution is that the handling of data should be more or less the opposite of what it is now. Right now you have lots of private data that are put under control, that are retrieved and used and monitored, whereas there's lots of data that should be public but are kept private, which has to do with the power relations behind data traffic. And of course, they should be the opposite. But this is not something very original, or it's something that is being discussed in lots of critique of the surveillance societies in general. I'm actually not 100% happy with that chapter, because it throws all kinds of discussions that are somehow connected, but it should make more clear where the connection is. And the connection is, of course, in the basic relation of algorithms to daily, of algorithms to behavior of economic agents. That's where the crucial point is here. And there also, and there's one frame that I kind of I forgot to mention, is of course in the background there's the whole idea of a behavioral economic. And again here I would say we enter into the field of media theory, because of course let's say the granularity of the self-description of the economic system depends very much on how many data you can actually compute in which time. And we're seeing in the classical economies, we're seeing a transition these days from old-fashioned aggregated systems, like that classic economy used to work with, to models that simulate single actors. That these transitions even happen within the banking, within the dynamic stochastical systems, general equilibrium, dynamic stochastical general equilibrium systems that are used by central banks, DSGE models. They now start to allow to implement single actors and build and model, so to say, behavior of single humans. And this is not because they all of a sudden were aware, oops, there are some people that behave in a different way. No, it comes with the, with the computing power that makes them, that first delivers them the data of single actors so that they can be analyzed, and secondly allows them to simulate, to model an economic behavior along single actors. It's pretty much like computer gaming. If you look at the so to say visual depiction in computer games, you have it's becoming more and more granular. Now we're up at the point that the single grass leaf is can be simulated according to the wind, that it can be physically simulated, and the same type of simulation, of course, process also takes place in economy, and then creates as it affects something that could be called behavioral economy. And so there's also a media relation behind a theoretical configuration, and it's not the opposite way around. It's not like an economist comes and says, "Oh, now I want to model behavior and want to build an economic model based on the behavior of persons." No, it's the opposite way. The economists have enough computing power that allows them to go into the details, and then these details, these details are framed along different terms, and one is behavioral. Yeah, exactly. The samples and the aggregates is something not completely of the past, because of course you build in the interaction, you still build samples on a certain way, but you ground the samples in different calculations. So the samples is just an intermediate step within the broader ecology of data, you could say. And this I have to note down because that has to be added to that chapter. It's not in there. Okay, here's also a chat going. Wait, Meredith, I just realized that you put people chatting. So I'm a bit Meredith, I don't see anything in the Hangout chat. Thanks to do this. Yeah, well, let me just, Meredith, quickly go through your question. Does this mean that statistics is as less important because you can look at things on an individual basis? Yes. And the point, the one other point where you can, how to say, where it shows how statistics, the general statistics, is being played by algorithms that operate on the basis of behavioral studies of personal behavior, is the elections. I don't know how much you followed the whole debate about the importance of profiling mechanisms like applied in that company Cambridge Analytica, but there's also a lot of different companies that do the same thing, and they, I mean, their claim that they made Trump win and that they made the Brexit party win is all doubtful claims. No? So there's lots of question marks behind. But it's of course that you have two forces of modeling, and you have the modeling that allows you to address the single voter, and to also send or to expose the single voter to a certain, how to say, political mix of news. And then there is the old aggregates that how to say, derive from old-fashioned polling, and that allow only for very different mechanisms of, how to say, voter, I would say, cheating on voters, and even making voters vote against their interests. and one has to look at that field. The field would merit a closer look, but in general, I would say it's the very same. It's the very same game that is also being played out in economy. That you have that you have a new mathematical type of modeling acting against another one. And in the economies, that in the political world, it plays out in one way. In the economic world, it plays out in a way that, as I said before, that the prices do no longer hold additional information because the information is already all there, and that means that pricing is we can make do economy. We can get rid of pricing, so to say. Okay, I go back to the chapter, but now, sorry for not having discovered your questions before. So if you have more, just go add it to the chat. I just saw something popping up from time to time, but didn't really follow it. Yep. Oh yeah, and there was another point that Jacob brought in. We can see the tradition in the move from physical book to ebook. Ebooks today simply map the old medium, and they aren't super useful in that sense. How ebooks develop in a digital medium. Okay, another deviation. I'm actually working, proposed to work with my publishing house on a project. It's very clear how one can think about that. Whether it works in that way, I don't know. But it's the same, of course, the same transition thing. No, we have the book, the PDF or whatnot, or ebook that still has the format of the book, but the one factor that it leaves completely out, that we are not unified readers. Each reader is different. Each reader comes with a different type of experience. And once algorithms know enough about what we have read and what we will be reading and what we might be interested in, to deliver the same book to every reader, of course, absolutely it doesn't make sense. Instead, you would get, so to say, the book would be a framework of ideas of which an algorithm would more or less present you what is useful to you and what you're interested in. And so the whole idea of the book as a monolithic format is not completely of the past, but yeah, it's going to be replaced by, how to say, personalized, how do I call it? Personalized thought assemblages that would also allow for a different type of interaction. I see. Okay, but this is, I mean, it's also on one side, it's very simple to come up then once one had that idea with these all kind of tech utopian ideas, and there the solutions are always easy to find. These solutions theoretically are always easy to find, but then in a broader sense, I would strictly maintain the idea that forecast is close to impossible, and the most productive way to handle it is test it and try to cheat it as good as you can. And by cheating, you find where to go. Okay, there comes the, I go back to the distribution chapter. That I had already, sorry. When tries to answer the what actually happens in a what actually is the change that an economy without money brings. On one level, also there the distribution must come in. On the level of behavior, and on the level of so to say that we support each other, on that one profits from the others, and that you have to integrate within that ecology of action, not much will change, I'm afraid. But when it comes to accumulation, when it comes to modes of organization, a lot of things will change. And there I'm not that sure. There's also, and I would say the change should be tremendous, is the whole attitude that you bring against that you posit against that exchange system that once you do no longer have to, how to say, implement that continuous self-calculation in the back, which I think is more a psychological moment in your behavioral patterns can completely change as soon as you're freed from that, so to say, can I afford that? Can't I afford that? What do I have to do? What are my limits? From that continuous self-calculation, self-observation through the medium of the price. Of course, there will be another self-observation. That's very clear. But I would rather, if I would look for examples of where that could happen, it would rather be in computer games. Like, okay, I'm also not gaming too much, but I look at games from time to time, and I let partially it's also my nephew that introduces me into all the games because he's a gamer, and let's say the organizational structures and the patterns of behavior are come much closer to what an interaction in an economic system could look like, instead of something that is driven by price and the internalized price system. Then there is, of course, the other question that derives straight from the transaction theorem, that one could easily question whether you need large entities like companies. I would say one of the main purposes of companies today, of huge companies, is today of, how to say, monopolizing this tributal payments, and it's actually more driven by the monopolizing function than by the actual function to divide, to distribute works, to allocate work. That is something that you can tell by looking at the internal structure of some companies that start to, even big companies that start to dismantle their hierarchies and operate internally mechanisms in the distribution of work that remind you more of Amazon Tag than of a classical company. That's something very important to, how to say, to keep these two parts of the company apart, like the, how to say, the accumulation part and the real, how to say, distribution of labor part. Okay, I have to note that down because it's something that is not said very clearly in the text. Should be made more clear. That was already the distribution chapter, and there's some things I would say that are missing, but we can go to the next chapter because they're coming there. Actually, if you manage to go through quickly to the next chapter, we can go back to it next time. But it's makes clear which is the basic term that I want to build everything from. It's called transactions, and we are accustomed to take as the basic transactions of all transactions is the buying something. In our economy, like somebody gives the good and another one pays. These two things tend to be always connected. If they're disconnected, or you can only disconnect them by postponing the payment or crediting the payment. But in our economy, the symmetrical transaction, where you have good on one side or service or whatever, and you have payment on the other side is the standard. And of course, from another point of view, one should say, no, this is actually not the standard, but the symmetrical transaction is already the connection, and a coupled connection, not a loose connection, a coupled connection of two transactions, namely of one transaction of the gift of a good and of another transaction of the gift of money as a quantifiable, standardized measure of value. And value, I would say, actually derives from money and not the other way around. It's not that money derives from value. The idea that we could have a value derives from money. And so for that system, we have to go back to the simple transaction, which is simply a person A gives this person A and the person B and an object X, and which A gives object X to B. One has to keep in mind that the person, also what I was calling person, can be whatever actor that operates within the economy as an economic agent. That means it is not limited to be humans. Also, for example, if there's an automatic car that drives you from here to there, the car is an acting entity within that system. Gives you something. X, which is getting you from A to B. And of course, that X can also be everything that is, so to say, assigned a purpose, or that fulfills a wish. So it's not only goods, but informations, events, access, actions, help, or whatever. Actually, I think that should also be mentioned in that chapter. Just one of the features of our system is that it tends to project all kind of other transactions to the production of industrial goods. So even to the degree that most of what we call the digital economy is actually a parasitic economy, that for the lack of, calculative basis, operates or derives its revenues mostly from advertising, which means it has a parasitical attachment to the old-fashioned economy of goods. And that obsession with goods, material goods, actually comes from the the heydays of the Industrial Revolution, when were about the production of goods, and so everything that was a good had a natural value, and everything that didn't have had to attach itself somehow to the production of goods. Now the other argument that I want to, the other point that I want to stress is that of course there is economic theory. There are economic theories that take labor as the core value for an economy. Whilst I would say the giving of something is the core element, and it's not labor that you give, but it's rather that you give something, and by giving it becomes labor. And the one basic argument behind that relation is that you can, of course, work in very many ways, and some of them don't make you part of an economy. But the crucial factor is always that the economy is a social relation, and so the social is the defining element, means the giving is the defining element, and not the work. Then okay. Then there is one dangerous moment, and that is that actually happens to very many of those kind of alternative economies, is that as long the giving remains something, so to say, pure, if it doesn't, if it exactly doesn't have the economic value attached. As soon as you start giving in order to want something back, you're leaving that realm of the, how to say, of the priceless, the realm of the free giving. It's more or less, it's the same argument that Derrida makes against Marcel Mauss, where he accuses him of always looking at the gift as something that is meant to have a counter gift. And that also counts to a certain degree for the whole discussion about care, which is a very important discussion. But of course, one could say care is a gift. But if you say I only give it because I want something back, it puts you in a very strange moral, how to say, position. Like, it's, of course, if you're raising a child, you give a lot, but it's not that you give it, that you would give it in an economic sense. And that means as soon as you subsume this type of giving, as one subsumes that type of giving under the economic relation, it turns into something else, and it turns actually into something that is not necessarily social, that is not adequate to the type of gift. It's a strange kind of paradox, and I don't know exactly whether that system would be able to solve it. I think so, but I couldn't tell you exactly how. But this is of course one paradox that one has to keep in mind, that some of the most valuable things that we actually do are things that are valuable exactly because they have no value, because they're not assigned a value. Then it's about transaction forms and the relation to derivatives. When that you have in the current financial system, you have the whole logic of derivatives, but this is not a very important argument here. I would also say that there was this buying in I'm going back again to the difference between buying, which is a symmetrical relation in comparison to the asymmetrical relation of the gift, of the giving. And of course, in an annotation system that annotates your transactions is all asymmetric transactions. They're annotated as such, not as being valued in a certain way. But that kind of how you can annotate something as such is a little bit difficult, and it's not clear. How would I want to note down a transaction without assigning it a price? Like, say, if today we note down transactions, it's very clear. You buy a piece of bread, and in your bank account there's $2 less or whatever, no? So that it's mapped to the price function. If you do not have this, let's put it this way around, if you don't have the general equivalent, you cannot simply map it that way, but one has to map it in a different way. Then, in that case, without general equivalent, you can only map it by, how to say, assigning whatever transaction you have a place within a network grid. That means, goes a bit back to the point that I had in the beginning, to say in that idea, what matters is not the object, but its matrix, its positional matrix. So basically, whatever transaction you have takes place is a transaction that promulgates itself, that lines itself up in other connections to other people. Like you buy a bread, you connect yourself to somebody who produced the bread, to a machine that transported the bread, to you're basically activating a node in a network. It's almost like a nerve system. By the transactions, you activate something, and it's that, so to say, that activation, that impulse of activation, that does not have to be coded in general equivalent, but rather should be noted as such. I I mean, I know that there is one of the points that where I'm not very clear, or where it's not, where I couldn't say you have to do it like that, but it's more on a theoretical level that I say, if you really want to avoid the general equivalent, it's of course in the notation of the single transaction where we already have to start, which would in turns mean that either think of it as a nervous system. You move something with a nervous system. Either one has with each transaction to calculate the whole world, because if you say everything is connected with everything else and you activate something, of course the small movements go to everywhere. Or you have factors that, so to say, limit the scope of the activation of the nervous system, which would then be again a kind of notation system. I'm not so sure where exactly there is the point where you could make these things practical, but the modeling the whole world with every transaction, maybe even it may even be computable, but it would of course be that kind of monadic structure that resembles the Leibniz monad that has to contain the whole world in itself. As I said, I'm not 100% sure how a practical solution of that would look like, but I kind of have the idea that I know where to look for it. I don't think that you would run into Gödel's problems. Gödel's problem, as far as I know, is something else, that it's more or less that you can formulate more questions than you have answers to. No, I think I think it's not on that level. I wouldn't say. One could derive maybe then economic questions of, like, if you want to say, can this system be governed in a way, or can this system be directed in a certain way, or can you recreate the whole of the system? Yeah, then you would maybe run into that. You would then, because the whole of the system always sits in each moment, in each transaction, you can never have you can never assemble anything, because the system would be in that continuous dynamic that wouldn't allow it to have the overview. So the whole would be in all its parts, but a whole, a totality would be created in all its parts, but there would not be a totality per se would not be possible. Maybe there we would run into Gödel's problems, but I'm also not so sure about that.
So I should give a time check. We're at 5:20 right now.
Yeah, which translates to 11:20. Maybe let me quickly run through actually the chapter is done. There's one argument of what's about, we're not talking about ontology. We don't know what, I want to know what things are, but rather what their relations are. And that's it. I would say also we give some 10 minutes for Q&A, and then we're through with the second chapter, which is like more or less what I wanted to do today. We're fine with that, Diana?
That would be,
so.
Yeah.
With that chapter, we're done here, and we don't next week we start with the media and network chapter. And for now, there's 10 minutes for Q&A.
Super.
Thank you for staying.
No, thank you. It's very, very good so far.
Yeah.
I did post another question in the Etherpad, but if anyone else has a question, they can go first, perhaps.
The Etherpad question, where did you post it? Let me
It's at
check.
the very bottom. There's just sort of general questions.
Ah, okay.
It's in blue.
Yeah. Additional thinking of automated cars as economic agents. What would an inhuman economy look like? How do these new economic agents get factored into varying degrees, the types of needs these specific actors may require to function within this economy? The self-driving car doesn't need clothes, food, water, or housing like a human would. It has different needs, of course. We run into the question of okay. This is already, of course, a problem in the existing economies. We do not consider themselves to have inhuman economic agents. I don't. I mean, of course, the self-driving car has specific needs, which is like getting a repair, getting a spare part, or like driving itself to the repair store in case something's wrong. So also has needs in some way, but that's of course the cheap answer to a more complex question. It's clear that that we cannot safely assume that these self-serving, let's say, and self-owned, most importantly, agents will limit their needs to just go do some repair. And especially the more complex the algorithms get that drive them, and that with them they drive us also, the more we may no longer be able to exactly understand what they do. However, we see a car driving in a way that doesn't make sense to us, but maybe half a day later it becomes clear to us that it's actually the forecasting of traffic went so far that the car already saw something that we only realized hours later. And then we would call that needs. I'm not so sure. Honestly, it's a super interesting question that I cannot answer.
Yeah, it's very abstract.
No, it points totally in the right direction, but it's very difficult to imagine how to interact with these entities. I mean, on an economic level, I would say for now it's enough to make clear that we have to deal with these agents somehow. But further down, I wouldn't. I mean, there's the whole discourse about automat and autonomous intelligence actors and whatnot, which is another research field. And I don't want to. I would not. I don't feel competent to give an answer there. I know that there's a discussion, but I don't have a precise position there. There's one of the issues when considering AI. A great intro to these issues are superintelligence, yeah. But also with decentralized autonomous agents being pioneered at the realm, the question is, what are the goals or the value system that are being programmed into these agents? Yeah. Problem stretches a little bit further because, of course, you can program let's say there's one thing that is clear. These agents are not programmed in the conventional way. No longer, no? They are trained agents, which has some effects that we cannot really control the cause and event relation. But we train them some type of behavior. We can also not assess what kind of rules they establish out of the behavior that they have trained. We can also not, or it's very difficult to retrain, to untrain these automats. Actually, it's one of the biggest problems that they have in the supervised learning systems and all the deep learning systems, that once they learn something, it's very difficult to correct what they learned. They don't know. They're working on it, but it's very problematic. And one has to think, given the fact that they don't necessarily communicate with us what makes them taking a decision, it's very unclear whether we should call that goals or value systems. I don't know. I know that same thing. No? The only thing that is very clear to me is that we cannot speak of programming any longer. This is training. We don't know why. There's no easy explanation why these things, these automats, have take certain decisions, which that refers to all systems where they're applied, be it a translation, but a translation is still at least language, so you can somehow assess why, or be it real-time behavior in whatever real environments. With the implicit biases involved, yeah, that's also the training setups. Of course, we have to put up biases, and how the training works is still and has to still be subject to a political decision. And that's actually a big problem, that how it looks now is that kind of political decision making is already by itself spoiled by, how to say, algorithms that model human behavior and also model human election behavior. So if you look at it from a dystopian side, they're already sneaking into our, how to say, capacity of taking political decisions. It's very clear that it's all about dangerous territory kind of out there, but we are thrown into that anyhow, so we have to deal with it. More questions, and it's going to come more in the other sessions. More questions? Then I would say
I have a lot of questions, to be honest, but it's 2 a.m. right now, and I live in Iran, and the economy in Iran, it has a very complex discussion to make, because here everything is a big mafia, to be honest, as I say, and then we are living, as you say, we have the washing machine, but there are no dishes to wash, and like we have everything here, but not in an original way. Like I have an iPhone here, but I have registered as an African, and I live somewhere in US, and I'm having a Iranian phone number, and I'm using a German credit card, like, because we are not allowed. Even for this conversation, for this seminar, I couldn't use this. Like Google says, like Iran can have an account at Gmail, but when they open it, the government closed it. So we have to use VPN for it. It's really fun here. And like about the people and the connections you want to make, I used to work at one of the coolest galleries in Tehran, and one of the best ones. It's called Bar, and the cheapest work there was for like $10,000. But like we have like only 200 collectors in this country, and all these galleries are trying to just become friends with these kind of people to just sell them to these people. So like
okay,
this kind of
okay.
people, and these people,
when it comes,
please, sorry.
So when it comes to the gallery system, I can calm you down. I can reassure you, it's not so much different from what it is here. So I would say it's almost as spoiled here. For the rest of the economy, I would say, okay, Iran is of course in a particular special situation due to the long sanctions that you had from here, that is actually putting, how to say, a lot of dysfunctionalities into your economic system. Dysfunctionalities that you also have elsewhere, but not to that degree. And I'm not sure what would happen if a system like as such, like cheated and spoiled and scrambled like that, would be put up onto a. I mean, on the other hand, as soon as you're having an algorithmic system, there's also going to be lots of ways to cheat it. That's very clear. And the cheating is an inherent, positive, productive quality. And maybe that's a paradox argument. One could even say, as dysfunctional as your economic system seems to be, as so to say, as more productive one has to be as users. But it's very clear that that, so to say, I'm aware that the Western sanctions, of course, do not help to create social equality, and most of them hit people that are already in a precarious situation. So anyhow, the sanctions these sanctions are complete bullshit, whether it be Iran or Iraq or other countries. But that's a different political issue that we're not discussing. We're not discussing in depth here.
Because sorry, you are talking like about a global system, about the economy, and we don't have any global economies. Here this is just about here, and whatever you are saying right now, I'm like thinking about it in Iran. As in Iran, it's all against your conversation of what you have said. And that's why I have a lot of questions, and right now I just have to clear my mind. Yeah.
Keep the questions till next time, and write it down, and write them down to the Etherpad. Note them. Use the Etherpad that we have as a notebook. It totally makes sense. I mean, it's very clear that I'm talking that my idea here is not a real economy, but my idea is to kind of sketch an utopian system, like how an economy could be if I had the freedom to build one. It's clear that it's pretty detached from real conditions, be it in Germany or Iran or the States or everywhere else. It's not. That's not really the point to model the reality here. It's clearly not. The seminar's not about that. But write down your questions and put them, post them either on the website of the new center or on that, and then maybe I can get back to some of the questions even before next meeting.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Yeah,
thank you. Yeah.
So then I would say next week, same time, we meet again.
Sounds great. Does anyone have last remarks, or?
It's 11:30 now in Berlin, and I'm going to have as a German says, a Feierabend beer, which is the after work beer.
Sounds good. Well, enjoy.
Yeah.
And thank you again.
Thank you. See you next week.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.